Hello and welcome to the Coon Hunting University podcast. This is your host, Tyler Duncan, and like always, class is in session. Hey y'all, so Coon Hunting University is brought to you by Superior Light Company, best lights in the business. If you don't believe me, go check them out, nighthunters.com. Use coupon code CHU podcast at checkout and receive almost $20 off Hellcat Max. But that code is good for any Superior Light on that website and the battery tester, which works with the Hellcat Max. So go over there and check them out. So today on Coon Hunting University podcast, we have a very special guest, Mr. Guy Manning. Mr. Guy was a professional basketball player. He's an outstanding individual, and I've really enjoyed this interview. He's one of the founding fathers of the Lone Star 5000 and the Eye Pea Classic in Texas. We're going to be talking about those two hunts and how they came about. We're also going to be talking about Mr. Guy's story and the dogs that he's owned and some of the dogs that he's hunted with that we've talked about on this podcast before, from other people. So it'll be really interesting to hear Mr. Guy's perspective on all of it, and it's an outstanding story, and his story should be celebrated. I'd like to issue a special thank you to Mr. Wesley Young, whom suggested I interview Mr. Guy Manning, and also Mr. Joe Manning Jr., whom you heard in previous episodes, who kind of helped me line it up a little bit, and Mr. Wesley also helped me line it up. So thank you to both of those individuals for helping us get this lined up. So I'm going to quit yapping. Without further ado, Mr. Guy Manning. Y'all sit back and enjoy. All right, Mr. Guy, great to have you on the Coon Hunting University podcast, man. I've really been looking forward to this, and I believe it's going to be awesome.
Well, I hope so.
Yes, sir, for sure. So, Mr. Guy, if you could, please tell the folks how to listen to this a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Guy Manning. I live in the Freestone County area here in the state of Texas. I'm a rancher by trade. I'm a retired professional basketball player. I've taught school, both on high school and college levels over the years. I attended Prairie A&M University. I received a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology and physical education. I also acquired a master's degree at Texas Southern University in Houston in business administration and MBA. And also I've done PhD work at the University of Houston and also Kalamazoo, University of Kalamazoo in Michigan. And I never finished my PhD simply because I was so involved I didn't have time to take a year off my workspace to finish my PhD, but I got quite a few hours for the PhD, which, it's good and it's paid off for me. I'm retiring from the ranching business for the most part now because of health issues, but we still own a big part of the farm. We just disposed about half of the acreage that we owned here in Freestone County. We still run a few cattle. My wife tells me all the time I got more hounds than I got cows. That may be true, but I'm going to say I have more good hounds than I have good cattle because those good ones are hard to come by. But I've been a fanatic about coon hunting for years. By it being a way of life for us when we were kids, not only a way of life, it was an outlet for recreation when we had time off from the ranch or from the farm. And we found a lot of joy, not only myself, but my two brothers who preceded me in death. That's what we did. We hunted and fished, and we just grew a real liking to coon dogs, to hounds, and we had all kinds in those days. And we thought we had some good ones because they put food on the table for us, not only with the raccoon, but, the squirrels. We did other things. We deer hunted, and my son seemed like he has followed that same path. He's not much in coon hunting, but this day and time, he doesn't like for me to be in the woods by myself too much. He goes with me, and he certainly loves competition hunting because he's kind of a competitive kid. He likes to see those guys get at it and bid on the dogs and all of that. But that's kind of where it's been for me for the last 70-plus years. I grew up on the farm, and I went off to college and went off to graduate school and had a brief career in the NBA and in the American Basketball Association. Now, to tell you exactly how old I am, in fact, I was one of the first 100 players drafted in the new American Basketball Association over 30-some years ago, and they have since been absorbed by the National Basketball Association. I was All-American at Prairie View for 3 years, playing basketball. We've gone from there, into other things, into ranching, into coon hunting, and into public speaking. I've spoken quite a lot around the country to young people, to graduate classes, to you name it, any social group that would seem to seek my services, I've obliged them over the years. Don't do so much of it anymore simply because of my age and of some health issues.
So when you were talking about being a professional athlete like you were, did you ever, coon hunting isn't a mainstream thing. Were you still coon hunting while you were a professional basketball player?
Oh yes, when I had the time, we were pleasure. We weren't competition hunting at the time. I'd come home on a leave on weekends or whatever time I had. My mom would always maintain my hounds. I always had me a hound. Of course, I bird hunted a little bit in between. We had a lot of birds out here, a lot of quail, bobwhite quail on the ranch, and I would do that. But yes, I would go in the bottom on the ranch or another place, and I'd turn the dog loose and I just love the sound of the voices, whether they were ball mouth or chop mouth. It's just something about them chasing whatever they were chasing in those days, and even now, most of the time they were chasing coon. That's some pretty good dogs. We thought we could get to a tree or two before the hunt was over, and we'd look at Mr. Ricky pretty often. But it was an intriguing moment for me, and even with some of the guys that I played with would come home with me on weekends or during the leave or off season, and I exposed them to coon hunting, to deer hunting, to wrangling cattle, and some of those guys went on to buy large blocks of land around this country in the United States, and a lot of them are into the farming now. They brought their family into it. They had never seen that, especially those kids who we would consider sort of underprivileged, grew up in confined home areas. All they saw was just a school, and when they could go to school, or they never got a chance. A lot of them never had ever gone out of the city until they went off to college. And that was a new way of life for them, and I'm pleased with that. If nothing more, I got an opportunity to expose my fellow man, and it's black and white, and all colors, to other ways of life in this country. And I was pleased, and I've been pleased with that. I draw a lot of substance from the fact that there were lives that I touched, that I think, who went on to pursue those lives and made very good at it. I got a friend right down the road here. I went to undergrad school with him, Wesley Ratcliffe. He owns the Caney Creek Ranch, several thousand acres, and he grows and he breeds and raises some of the finest Charbray cattle in the United States right now. Larry Jeffries in Houston, who played with the Detroit Pistons in his day. He went on to become a great cutting horse man. He bought properties and bought some of the finer horses in the country. He's done very well. But there's many of them. Tony Brackens Jr., just above me here, about, I am not 3 or 4 miles of me. He has a big farm, a big ranch, and he's in the cattle business. Of course, these kids, now, Tony had some exposure on the ranch because he grew up in the country. But here again, I was just trying to show them there, diversify your life if you possibly can, because athletics are only for so long. And when that is over, what are you going to do then? And I certainly inspired kids to go to school. And when I found good athletes, I would call different universities and colleges around the country to take a look at these kids, give them a chance. And some of them have gone on to be very good citizens and good producing people in this country. That gives me a lot of substance and energy when I think about that.
Yes, sir, for sure. And Mr. Guy, you hear it time and time again. As far as you can take someone from the city, have never been out of the city, take them to the country, and that's what they want to do. They want to be in the country. But you take someone out of the country and bring them to the city, you don't ever hear of anybody leaving the country to go to the city. You know what I mean?
Good reply. You are so right. It's addictive. There's no question about it.
Yes, sir. For sure.
It is addictive.
It is.
Yes, sir.
And that's something that I've noticed. You talk about you expose those people, and now they're living in the country and they're wanting a ranch. But if they exposed you to the city, you didn't move to the city,
No, I did not. I did not. In fact, I lived in the city for quite a few years. I had a career with Southwestern Bell Telephone Company. For about 18 years, I worked for the company. And it was always my quest. The day would come that I would say enough is enough. And I moved back. I really did, and I made a decent living in the city. My wife was gainfully employed. I was gainfully employed after I left pro ball, but I was in graduate school, and when that ended, I was steady looking for the day that I could uproot and come back to the country.
Yes, sir. So, how did you get your start into competition coon hunting?
I'd always heard about it for years. And over beyond it being a way of life, in reference to recreation and also providing food, I attended a competition hunt. I used to field trial bird dogs, and I saw how a man and a dog could team up and produce a product that was second to none, and that had no other product like it in the country or the world. I had read about the foxhounds in England. I read about different dogs being bred for different things, for its hunting and for its chasing game, retrieving game, pointing game. And I got to looking at, I believe it was a full cry, and got a chance to read about men who were trapping lions. They'd run the mountain lion till they tree it, and then they would sedate it and move it to different locations, especially if the cat was giving trouble to. And in those days, and what I was reading about was sheep herders. Cats were pretty tough on sheep. And then they had what they call a competition one day. And I remember looking at the movie where the red fern grows, and I saw how those people got together as a community and put together a little stipend for the best coon dog. And I said, that's interesting to me. And then I got to pursuing it a little bit more, and I finally seen a American cooner, and I was looking at some UKC hunts, how they would have bench shows, coon on a log, hunts at night. And I said, that's interesting. I attended them several times. Then I got to pursuing me a competition dog. I didn't know the difference, but a good coon dog can find his place anywhere. Competition, putting food on the table, or just chasing a raccoon. And it just kind of grew on me as a country boy who likes competition, who liked to meet people. And during that time, I met some of the finest people as I've ever met. Now, I've been in different phases of life, from school teaching to professional athletics to politics, you name it. And I said, there's some fine people dealing with dogs. And finally, an older man asked me, would you like to have a competition dog, or would you like to try to go on a competition hunt? What is a competition hunt? And I remember years ago, when people don't remember, we used to hunt 4 hours. And in hunting those 4 hours, it was a kind of a marathon. And you had to know your dog's voice. You had when he was tracking, when he was treeing, when he struck, the temperament of the track, whether it was a cold track, a hot track. And I said, that's kind of scientific too, And I just kind of went from there and got the competition hunting on a local level, and then I kind of went on a national level as far as going to the UKC World, Walker Days, Winter Classic, and I said, man, these kind of people follow hounds? And one thing led to another, and then I came in touch with a man named Jarvis Humphreys. I used to see his picture in the magazines all the time, hunting black and tan dogs. And I got a chance to meet Jarvis, a very personable man, a man who I think whatever he set his mind to do, he could do it with a degree of success. When he started PKC, a lot of people won't believe this. They look at my number now and they said, man, you got in this thing when this thing was in its infant stages. I said, well, I did. Had an opportunity one time to buy 25% of PKC, me and a friend of mine. And I don't regret not having bought it, but I see a way if I had, I don't think I'd have regretted it, but Jarvis made a run at it, and he made a great success. And this thing has blossomed into almost a 4,500 if you ask a lot of people, right now. It was always intriguing to me what you could do with a dog. And I was reading about blind people, how they take a dog could lead you around for the rest of your life or the rest of its life and keep you safe. Now, that's a pretty intelligent animal. Now, some of them I wouldn't trust my life with, but but he's a pretty intelligent being, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
If you can find one.
Yes, sir. And it's amazing. Dogs really are overall.
I'm telling you. Yeah. It really, they really are.
They even breed dogs now that can sense cancer and stuff. You're
so right at that. They use them for medicinal purposes. You're so right.
I mean,
drug detection. You name it.
Bomb detection. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
It's insane, really, how much we wouldn't be here if it weren't for dogs. You know, I don't.
I think you're good point. Good point.
We might, but it would have been a lot tougher. You know,
it would have been a lot tougher. You're so right.
So, and you were talking about the early days of PKC and everything, and you know, you obviously you were there from the start of it, or even before when it was PCA, right?
Right, when it was PCA. That's exactly what it was, PCA.
Yep. And I've heard the old stories and everything, and it's really cool how it started. You've obviously accomplished a lot because, you know, I was researching you for this, and I found an article, I think in 2004, where you had won your 7th Texas state championship. You won first place, and the dog that won second, you actually owned it too. So
yeah, I did, sure did.
If you could, please tell me some of those hounds that you've owned over the years and y'all's accomplishments, and just walk us through all that.
And during that time, I had a dog called the Texas Ranger, and I had a dog called Rock Jr., which we call him RJ, which was probably the most winning dog money-wise that I've owned. He won somewhere close to $100,000 during that time, and we didn't have the hunts that we have now. A $10 hunt, you'd have 40, 50 dogs at a $10 hunt. And this dog was a consistent winner. Didn't have a great mouth, had a pretty mouth. It was nice to listen to, but didn't have a volume that I've heard in a lot of dogs. The Ranger dog was a little bit different. He was kind of a blow-through young, that's kind of an ambush type dog, but could track. Both of those dogs went back to the old Finley River Chief line, and that's what I kind of got addicted to when I first started in the competition hunting, because when you look at a 4-hour hunt, especially this time of year, later on in the winter, you're going to get a lot of cold. We used to have a lot of cold weather out in our country. Every dog can't track a coon 2 hours old, or 2.5, 3 hours. But I do believe I've seen some Finley River dogs trail a coon, I believe, they could trail it a mile and tree it. But that other dogs wouldn't say very little at all, if anything at all, on it until tree time came. I was hunting a dog during that time called Rock Jr., RJ, and the Texas Ranger. The Ranger won the overall state championship that year. And we had the runoff. My RJ dog, I didn't hunt him very much because he was getting some age on him, taking 16 dogs in the championship, and he was the 16th dog. I hunted him and won the championship with him that same night, and he was just an old dog that treed raccoons. Now, hogs were becoming very prevalent in our country at that time. He loved him a pig now and then, and I could tell you the moment that he struck a pig. But if he ran across a coon track, I could almost tell you the moment that he switched. He was going to switch, and he was going to tree that coon. It didn't make a difference whether he had been on the ground the last hour or two. He could be laid up. He could run on that tree. And if he caught that wind, he was a treed raccoon. And I bred that dog. That's some of my old lines. I didn't breed Ranger. Got it from a young man down in Louisiana. But he and Jim Smith and Jack Cannon were big buddies. Man, I kept worrying about that dog, that Ranger dog. He was a little much for some of them because he'd get through the country. I was a little younger then. I could walk at a decent pace, but I found him many times treed. We didn't have the technology then that we have now. But yeah, those two dogs were the year I won the state championship overall, and then won the runoff that same year with two different dogs.
So, what about some of your dogs maybe before them? I mean, obviously you won a ton before them. If that was up to your 7th state championship, then right?
Right. I think all total, if my archives serve me correctly, I won right in the neighborhood of 20 to 21 state championships, PKC, in some form of it. I owned a dog called Bean Blossom Bounce, who was a son of the world champion Bean Blossom Buck, owned by Pride Gann, I believe, yes. And Buck was off a dog called Finley River Buck, who was a son of I believe A. Shires Ozark Dan, who was out of Finley River Chief. And this dog was, I made him a Grand Night champion, and I ended up selling him to some people in Indiana. And this is a heartwarming story. I'm going to be very brief with this one. That old dog was about 5 or 6 years old. I was working some young dogs, and he was I had him in the kennel, and he loved to hunt. And this guy called me. And I said, well, I got an old Grand Night champion dog. I'm not hunting him. I said, but he loves to hunt. And I said, I'd hate to be cut off from the things I like to do because of age. He said, well, that's what I'm looking for. Well, this guy shipped him to this guy, and the first night he got him, he said, I couldn't stay at home. I turned him loose, and he treed 2 coons here out of my trailer park. He ended up selling that dog. He had a young man working for him, and this young man's father was sick, and his mom was sick. He was the breadwinner. A young man, he was less than 20 years old. He took that old dog that winter, and hides were a good price during that time. And that man called me in the spring and told me the story behind that dog after he got him. That man sold over 200 raccoons to keep bread on the table for his mother and father till they recuperated. Now, I don't know what their problems were, but he was the breadwinner. He said that kid, and said I ended up giving him that dog because of the things that he did for his family with that old dog. Now, see, at some point in life, money is not everything. You think about the people you touch and the people whom you come in contact with, and you enhance the quality of life. And who would have thought that a dog could do that for an entire family? And this kid, he kept the lights on, kept the water running, and he also put bread on the table with that old dog, selling over 200 raccoon pelts that winter. Pretty impressive. I know it was intriguing to me.
Yeah, yeah. And, I'm sure that there was a lot of that back then, too.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, now it's a lot different. I mean, hides aren't worth anything, but
no, right.
Back then, everybody was poor,
Sure. Sure.
So that dog, he was a supplemental income.
That's right. It was a supplemental income. In fact, that gentleman that owned the trailer park said that was the only income because he helped the kid too, because the kid worked for him there in the trailer park. He said, but man, at night, he said, I'll let the kid off early in the evening to get some rest where he could hunt. So he would hunt just about all night. And this was in Indiana. And he said, I just thank you. He said, we would like to get another one if you. And I had some young dogs. They weren't near the coon dog he was. But I think I ended up shipping that man a couple more dogs over the years, and he was pleased with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome story. It really is. What are some of the Ebony River dogs that you've owned over the years?
All right, I'm going to give you a list of them. I own Ebony River's Annie Mae, who was out of the dog that won the National. She was a dual grand. I ended up selling her to Larry Meeks them over the years. She was a good one. At 7 years old female. They took her and won with her, bred her, she produced. I had Ebony River's RJ, Ebony River's Texas Ranger. I had Ebony River's Black Eye Pea. I had Ebony River's, I got 40 dogs. I've been going through my archives here. In the last 30 years, I got 45, right at 50 night champions and grand night champions, gold champions and platinum champions, and just regular champions. My son came up with about 50 dogs, and 90% of those, or 95%, I bred and raised right here in my kennel from the old Finley River line and the old Johnson Banjo line.
That is extremely impressive. It really is. I don't know if people realize how hard that is to do.
Well, that's what we did. And all of this was part-time. I never gone full-time. Had the opportunity to be a full-time trainer, handler, for different people. And, J.C. Ellis asked me several times if I'd go to hunt for him, but that was never my objective. I had a family, and I was trying to raise it. I had one son. I was trying to raise him and my wife, and I maintained a job. Of course, I had a ranch that I was maintaining, and all this is on a part-time basis.
Yeah, that's extremely impressive. It really is. And do you feel like if you would have started to do it as an income, it would have spoiled it?
I do. I really do. Not that we are extravagant livers. My wife and I both came from, menial upbringings, and we know the value of a dollar. For what I was looking for, I never looked to get rich in this business. I was looking for the satisfaction that I found in it and meeting people and dealing with dogs. Because at the end of the day, I brought nothing in this world, and as a result, I won't be carrying anything out. And I was just trying to find, and I did find a great amount of satisfaction in dealing with dogs and the people I met in and out these hunts.
Yes, sir, for sure. So you were talking about how Johnson's Banjo and Finley River Chief, are they kind of the foundation for your line of dogs? By
all means. Now, that's not to say I haven't used other lines of dogs, but by all means, they're the foundation. If I had to give if there's a line and people consider them as lines, those would be the two line of dogs of the two breeds that I use for the foundation if I kill them. I had an old Jeep called the old Rachel, Ebony Rivers Rachel. That was the original Rachel. She was a granddaughter of Spring Creek Rock. I got her when she was just a yearling pup, kept her till she's dead. She's buried here on the ranch. She was 17 or 18 years old when she died. We made her a Grand Night champion. We placed her somewhere in the AC of what was the only World Hunt at the time, the ACHA World Hunt at Pine Bluff, Arkansas one year. And I remember my wife telling me many times that I just don't want you breeding her no more. So you're going to kill her with puppies. You've hunted her to death. And I was still living in Houston. I had a nephew named Richard, man, and it lived up close to the ranch. I brought her to him for him to just keep. So I could, baby, bring her up here. I'm going to just let her run around the house. She'd go off and hunt, but come back. But when she died, he took her down here in my bullpen. And by the way, I bred and raised and sold breasts at Charlotte cattle for years, too. I buried her in my bullpen, and her grave is still there. And that was the old foundation line. We got a little bit shy of 100 pups out of her and about 7 or 8 breedings. And I was breeding her back to a son of Spring Creek Rock. That's where we got named Clifton River Rock. That's where we got most of our better dogs. They were good-looking dogs, had real nice miles, most of them. And they were fair-sized dogs. And they seemed to come to this world with some sense. You could teach them. They had what I call yard dog sense. You could teach them, and they could trail. And when tree time came, most of the times you had to clam, shoot, or cut because they had the grease somewhere there.
Yeah, that's awesome. It really is. Did you ever get a chance to hunt with Chief or Banjo or Spring Creek Rock or any of those famous dogs from back in the day?
I had a friend in Houston and we're gonna get to Chief and Johnson Banjo. Old Spring Creek Rock, when they first started collecting semen on dogs, Dr. Randy Freilich was the pioneer vet that started that. They didn't know how to do it. This man orchestrated that process. He kept Spring Creek Rock in his office. He was just like one of his employees. Rock would come to the office with him every day. And I'd go, and Dr. Freilich was my main vet at the time when I lived in Houston. I used to go over and sit and play with old Rock. I never hunted with him. He was a little bit old. We didn't try to hunt him. Now, I was in several hunts where Friendly River Chief and Johnson Banjo were. I never drew them. But from people that had hunted with them, and I listened to them run time or two. But they was getting of age when I was kind of coming on the scene. I knew the man that owned Old Spring Creek Rock, I can't think of his name now, was a gentleman in every respect of man. And the guy that owned Friendly River Chief, he came from some of the Amish people. That dog was bred up in Pennsylvania. But the last man that owned him was, I want to say, John Monroe. And I talked to John many times. I never did get to hunt with him, but he was an old dog. If a coon walked here at 6 o'clock and you turned him in on 9, he'd tree him somewhere before 12. Had a real good mouth. He wasn't an explosive type tree dog. When he set up, he would tree about 3 or 4 barks a minute, but he was not going anywhere. If you waited to 12 o'clock the next day, that's where you hooked him on the lead. And that's what people went for, is hunts at that time. Hunts, they were marathon hunts, 3 and 4 hours. See, it hadn't been long ago that they went to 3. I mean, they got off to 3-hour hunts. They used to be 3 hours for years. And then now we got hour hunts. We got 2-hour hunts, hour and a half, which is good. You know, that's good, especially being my age. I can't hold up that long most of the time now, but I never got a chance to answer your question. I never got a chance to hunt with either of the dogs, Barack, Chief, or Johnson's Banjo. But I had tons of the sons and daughters out of my hunted with.
Yes, sir, for sure. So, since you brought up Spring Creek Rock being the first dog ever collected, I got a little trivia for you. What was the second dog ever collected?
Now, correct me now. Was it Demon?
No, sir. And Dr. Randy Freilich actually collected him, but it was House's Lipper.
Oh, was it? Now, I hunted with him a ton. I judged him, I don't know, 15 or 20 times, because he would come to the state championship, and I had to judge. You know, I was one of the judges for the Grand Night Champion part. House's Lipper, that is right. But hold on, the whole Lipper there. You're right. He tried to collect. I'm trying to think of this other dog that Bellas had. Demon wouldn't freeze.